This story taught me that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the greatest atrocities. My daughter-in-law, Sophie, stole much more than money from me. She stole my dignity, my trust, and nearly destroyed my family. But in the end, life itself took care of justice in a way neither she nor I could have imagined. It all started 6 years ago, when my son Colton brought Sophie home for the first time. She was beautiful, with those green eyes that sparkled when she smiled, hair as black as the night, and a sweet voice that could charm anyone. From the very first moment, I sensed something odd about her, a falseness hiding behind that perfect smile. But Colton was madly in love, and as a mother, I wanted nothing more than to see him happy. After my husband passed away, Colton became my entire world, my only son, my pride. When he married Sophie, I opened both my home and my heart to her, treating her like the daughter I never had. The first few months were peaceful. Sophie was polite, helped me with household chores, and seemed truly interested in adapting to our small family. As a newlywed, she learned from me every little detail about married life. She joined the prayer groups with devotion and often accompanied me to church, as if she were trying to build an even stronger bond with me. Gradually, I began to wonder if my first impressions had been unfair. Perhaps deep down, it had only been a mother's instinct, that protective impulse that insists on seeing dangers even where there are none, trying to shield my son from any pain. It was one morning in March, while we were preparing breakfast in the kitchen, that Sophie gave me the news that changed everything. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "Mrs. Adeline, I'm pregnant." My heart leapt with joy. I was finally going to be a grandmother. I hugged her tightly, crying tears of happiness, already imagining the baby who would soon fill our home with laughter. In that moment, every doubt I had about her vanished. Sophie was carrying my grandchild, and that made her sacred in my eyes. The weeks that followed were magical. Colton was overjoyed, already talking about baby names and making plans to turn the back room into a nursery. I threw myself wholeheartedly into the role of grandmother. I bought yarn to knit blankets, started saving money for baby clothes, and even redecorated part of the house with the little one in mind. Sophie seemed like the perfect expectant mother. She had morning sickness, complained of back pain, and her belly gradually began to grow. She always wore loose-fitting clothes that concealed her figure, and whenever I offered to accompany her to her medical appointments, she politely declined, saying she preferred to go alone because too many people in the office made her nervous. It was in the 4th month that the extortion began. One day, Sophie came home in tears, saying the doctor had detected some complications in the pregnancy. According to her, she needed to undergo special tests that were extremely expensive and not covered by public health care. "Mrs. Adeline, I need $5,000 for the tests. If I don't do them, I could lose the baby." Hearing that shattered my world. The thought of losing my grandchild terrified me. Without hesitation, I went to the bank and withdrew all the money I had set aside for emergencies. $5,000, months' worth of savings, which I handed over without a second thought. Sophie thanked me with tears in her eyes, promising to pay me back as soon as Colton received his next paycheck. But the complications didn't stop there. The following month, it was another $3,000 for special vitamins, then $4,000 for a 3D ultrasound the doctor had supposedly recommended. With every request, Sophie showed up more distressed, always with some medical explanation that sounded convincing to me. Someone who had never studied medicine. She knew exactly how to strike at my weakest spot, the unconditional love I felt for the grandchild who hadn't even been born yet. Colton started to find all those medical expenses suspicious, but Sophie always had an answer ready. She said she didn't want to worry him since he was already working so hard to provide for the family, and that I, as the grandmother, would understand these female matters better. She made me feel special, important, as if I were the only one who could protect my grandchild. As the months went by, something began to bother me deeply. Sophie was supposedly in her 7th month, but her belly looked strange. It didn't have the rounded shape typical of a late-stage pregnancy, and she always avoided letting me touch or feel the baby move. When I insisted, she would say the baby was sleeping or positioned in such a way that the movements couldn't be felt. The medical expenses kept piling up. In the 6th month, she claimed she needed $8,000 for urgent treatment for anemia. In the 7th, another $6,000 for hospitalization due to high blood pressure. I had already spent more than $30,000, everything I had saved over the years, but I still kept helping her. With every request, I felt like I was saving my grandchild's life. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Lillian, who first planted the seed of doubt in my mind. She had been a midwife for over 30 years and knew pregnancy better than anyone. One Sunday after Mass, she pulled me aside and whispered, "Adeline, forgive me for saying this, but Sophie's belly doesn't convince me. I've seen too many pregnant women in my life, and something just isn't right." At first, I was offended by her words. How could anyone doubt my daughter-in-law's pregnancy? But Lillian's comment kept echoing in my head. I began paying closer attention to the details. Sophie never had heartburn, which is common in pregnant women. She had no varicose veins, no swollen feet, and none of the constant drowsiness typical of the last trimester. She went up and down the stairs with no problem, carried heavy objects with ease, and her skin didn't have the usual pregnancy glow. When I asked her about these symptoms, she always had an excuse. She said she was lucky not to suffer from those things. My son had told me that once Sophie's belly began to show, she wouldn't let him see it anymore. She excused herself by saying she was getting too fat and didn't want her husband to see her like that. He, innocent as he was, believed her. He didn't want to upset Sophie or risk the baby, since pregnancy required delicate care. The 8th month arrived with yet another financial emergency. Sophie said she had to deliver the baby in a private clinic because there was a risk of complications. That meant another $20,000, which I had to borrow from my sister Sarah. By then, I was drowning in debt. I owed the bank, relatives, even neighbors. But the thought of losing my grandchild during childbirth terrified me so much that I couldn't bring myself to say no. My suspicions grew stronger every day, but the love I felt for the child I believed was in her womb blinded me to reality. I was being manipulated in the cruelest way possible, through my love as a grandmother. The 9th month came, and with it, my decision to finally uncover the truth once and for all. There were too many inconsistencies to ignore, and the financial pressure was suffocating me. I decided to secretly follow Sophie when she left for yet another urgent medical appointment. That December morning, I followed her from a safe distance. To my surprise, she didn't go to any doctor's office. Instead, she went into a costume shop downtown. I waited outside for almost an hour until I saw her come out with a discreet bag. I followed her to a house. Yes, she had her own house that Colton knew nothing about, rented with my money. Through a half-open window, I witnessed the most shocking scene of my life. Sophie removing a fake silicone belly, the kind used in theater and movies. She carefully placed it in a drawer, along with other props meant to simulate pregnancy. In that moment, it felt like the world collapsed on top of me. 8 months of lies, more than $80,000 extorted, my trust destroyed, my family deceived. The pain I felt was indescribable, a mix of anger, sadness, and humiliation that tore me apart. I went back home in a state of shock, not knowing how to tell Colton that his wife had been pregnant only with greed and cruelty. How could I explain to my son that the woman he loved had deceived us in such a painful way? How could I admit that I had been foolish enough to believe that farce for so long? That night, Sophie came home playing her role of a heavily pregnant woman to perfection. She complained of back pain, asked Colton to massage her swollen feet, and even staged a few fake contractions. Watching her act like that, knowing the truth, was pure torture. Every fake moan, every caress Colton gave to that silicone belly, every plan we made for the baby's arrival, it was all a lie. I knew I had to act, but I also knew that the revelation would shatter my son. Colton had prepared himself emotionally to be a father. He had bought a crib, a stroller, and baby clothes. Every night, he talked to Sophie's belly, singing lullabies to a baby that never existed. How could a mother cause such pain to her own child? I spent 3 days planning how to expose Sophie without completely destroying my son in the process. I decided she needed to be confronted in front of the entire family so she couldn't invent more lies or twist the situation in her favor. I organized a special dinner to celebrate the final days before the birth. I invited my sister Sarah, my in-laws, and even Mrs. Lillian, who had always doubted the pregnancy. During dinner, while everyone was making plans for the baby's arrival, I stood up and said, "Sophie, dear, why don't you show us how your baby is doing today?" Sophie, sitting right beside me, began stammering, struggling to keep up her charade. But at that instant, overtaken by uncontrollable courage, I suddenly lifted her blouse and, without hesitation, ripped off the fake belly that hid her lies in front of everyone. 8 months. For 8 months you deceived me, stole my money, manipulated my feelings, and toyed with my son's heart. But life has a peculiar way of bringing justice. The reaction was immediate. Colton was in shock, my family was outraged, and Sophie tried to come up with excuses until the very last second. But the evidence was undeniable. When she realized there was no way out, she finally confessed her scheme, trying to justify it by saying she needed the money to pay off gambling debts. The revenge life had in store for her was far more painful than anything I could have imagined. Not only was Sophie thrown out of the house that very night, but Colton, devastated by the betrayal, pressed charges for fraud. She was arrested and ordered to repay every dollar she had stolen, in addition to serving a sentence under probation. But what satisfied me the most was discovering, months later, that Sophie actually did become pregnant, for real this time, by another man she had also tried to deceive. However, he abandoned her the moment she announced the pregnancy. Life's irony condemned her to face a real pregnancy under precarious conditions, alone, without the family she had destroyed, and without the money she had stolen from me. Today, years later, Colton has healed from the betrayal and found a good woman who gave me the grandchild I had always dreamed of. I recovered most of the money through the courts, but most importantly, I regained my peace of mind. I learned that trust is important, but that a grandmother must also protect her family with wisdom, not just blind love. Sophie taught me that there are people willing to do anything for money, even fake a pregnancy and play with the most sacred feelings of a family. But I also learned that the truth always comes out, and that justice, even if delayed, always finds those who deserve it.